Guys, this is Stone Point Design, and I'm going to show you how to make this red top here, this scoop top. See how it has a scoop at the neck, and then it also has a scoop similar to a shirt tail bottom in the front and the back. The front and the back is the same in this. This builds quickly and easy. It's also made for beginners. Now this odd thing I have here is to try and explain the basics of how this top is built. This is one piece. The bodice of this, not the arms, is one piece, and so it's built vertically. Do you see these toothpicks will represent rows, crochet rows, and in this particular top it's just a double crochet with an 11.5 hook. It's an 11.5 hook. I'll write that down. You could do an 11 with no problem. I crochet loosely, but it doesn't matter with this top. Each row, this builds vertically this way, and each row, and there's no seam. You will be going right from you will be making the armpit and then going right around to the back and slip stitching to the side. So this one is a medium to large. You know, it's really could be an extra large if you're short, if you're not real tall. I'm about 5'7", and it's very long, as you can see. The other thing to note is this one here is 40 stitches. This way. It's a chain of 40, and then it's built this way. And then it builds, because it's a double crochet with an 11.5 hook, each row will be an inch. So it builds really quickly. You won't have to tear a lot out, but let me explain how this scoop bottom is made. It's also a scoop top. The only reason the bottom is wider than the top is because I single crocheted along the top, and I put in about two single crochets per, or 3 single crochets per 2 rows, and here I put in 2 single crochets per row to edge it so that it made it bigger up here and shortened the neckline. So you can make the neckline however big or small that you want, and the bottom obviously you can make as big as you want. I put in 2 single crochets per vertical row. You could put in 3 if you needed this stretchier at the bottom. So how this is done, I know this is an odd looking thing here, but each of these rows are exactly 40 stitches, each of them, and so it begins here and it builds this way. Each of them are exactly 40 stitches, and how that's done is when you decrease on one end and increase on the other, and what happens is, let's see if I can make it do this so you can kind of see, just so you can picture it. This is how the cutout shoulder, the Stone Point cutout shoulder top is done, and the Stone Point tunic. Many of my tops are done like this because I like the look of them. It's easy. You keep an exact stitch count. So you see how all of these toothpicks are the same length, just as all of these rows are the same length. And these toothpicks each represent a row. So what you do on this end, as you're decreasing, you will not chain one before you will not chain anything before you turn, and that will make that will cause it to taper down like this. And then at the bottom of this row, sorry, I'm moving this around, but you see how it scoops? You make the front just exactly the same as the back, so it makes the bottom scoop nicely and gives you that nice scoop in the neckline. And then, so you won't chain one and you'll turn, and that'll cause it to decrease, to taper. And I don't like to say decrease because you're really not decreasing stitches. You're just moving each row down. The row is staying the same length and the same amount of stitches. And at the bottom, you're going to chain and you're going to turn, but you're going to go into the very first stitch from your hook, which would be actually the same, technically the same stitch as what your chain was in. And so that's going to cause you to move a stitch this way. Oops, let me use this. It's going to cause you to move a stitch this way and gain a stitch this way, so you have the same amount of stitches, and that causes this nice scoop neck, and that causes this shirt tail type of bottom. You know, the tunic and the cutout shoulder have a little trim on the bottom, but it's not the trim that causes this V or this scoop, this yoke. It's using this method. And the small to medium is only 30 stitches this way, and the medium to large, or it's almost an extra large, is only 40 stitches, and it builds an inch at a time, as I said, so it's really fast. Now let me give you some measurements before we get started. The small to medium is under 300 yards. This top, including the sleeves, was 385 yards, so under 400 yards, which would be about 8 ounces of the 4 worsted weight yarn. So you're not using a ton of yarn. I used these big spools of the sugar and cream because I don't like ends, and this is made in all one piece until you put on the neckline and the sleeves. Now nothing is sewn together. This is made in all one piece. The armpit is only 2 rows, and then you slip stitch over to the side. And then the sleeves are added on, but there's no sewing involved in this at all. So this is how the basics of it is done. And if you can imagine that each of these toothpicks are a row. So it builds across this way, and it's not made in 2 pieces and then sewn together at the armpits. It's made in one entire piece. So you don't have ends. It saves a lot of time. The fit is really nice. When the yarn, when the rows are built this way, it lays really nice on the body. The drape is just I find is more flattering, is stretchier, is kind of it's not clingy, even though it kind of gives you a nice shape. So anyhow, this is what we're going to be doing. So this is the reason our stitch count needs to stay the same, and the reason we don't just let me explain the reason. So when if we were going up, here, let me draw this real quick. We could, when we crocheted down and then crocheted back up, we could just not crochet in the last stitch. Instead of doing the decreased taper by not chaining one, we could just not go into the last stitch. But the problem is that ends up making it almost a stair step type of neckline, and I like a smoother type of neckline, so that's the reason I just I don't chain anything and then turn, so that makes it nice and smooth. Now at the bottom here, we're going to be chaining 2 and then, or 3, because this was going to be a double crochet, and then we're going to be double crocheting into this basically the same stitch as the chain, which is you would normally go into the second stitch from the hook. I say the first stitch in the hook, but it's really the same stitch as the chain. And if you need to make adjustments, you make them at the bottom, and we make them flat so that all we do is single crochet around the bottom, and we keep this nice and smooth, a smooth scoop and flat. Now the only tricky part, and it's not that tricky because you can fix it, is when we get to the middle, we will be decreasing up here. When we get to the middle, we will change directions, or I'm sorry, tapering decrease. It's not a decrease in the amount of stitches, it's a tapering. You're moving the whole row this way. When we get to here, we're going to be reversing directions. So at the top, we're going to be doing a taper increase to come up, and at the bottom here, we're going to be doing a taper decrease. So that's the only tricky part, is this middle right here. The armpits are super easy. It just requires some counting. But remember, we're increasing. It's only a 40 at the longest, probably a 40 stitch row. So don't get discouraged. You could practice on a small swatch, and there's instructions for how to do that. But we're going to do a complete one. So like I said, I just don't like ends, so a big spool of any color you'd like, just a big spool of any color you like, of 4-weight, 100% cotton. Now your gauge isn't that important, but it will be much more difficult if you use, for instance, the Caron cotton, because that is only 60% cotton, and so it's going to squish way down, and you're not going to be building an inch at a time. And the reason we want to build an inch at a time is to make this fast and easy, and so beginners can do it. So understand, the Caron cotton is not 100% cotton. It's going to build completely differently. In fact, it's only going to build about a half an inch at a time, if at the most. So please use 100% cotton. It feels nice in the summer. It washes up nice. Just understand, it's not really a gauge issue. It's just going to take you a lot longer, and the measurements are going to be more difficult. Okay, so right now, gather up your supplies, get your 11.5 hook, and pause this video and come back with your supplies. Okay, let's talk about sizing. There will be a written pattern, but let's explain this. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be measuring from the top of your shoulder to about your hip bone. And this and we're going to measure across our body for this section right here. And this section right here is going to determine how large you need it. So if you're shorter, you want it wider, you want it looser this way, we're going to be building this way, so this will be determined as you crochet. But you can take a tape measure and you can measure from here to how far you want it, or you could, it's a little bit harder to measure from here. So I would take from the top of my shoulder until about 2 or 3 inches below my belly button. And whatever this measurement here is what I would do. Now this, I measure at about 17, 18 right here. This is 2 stitches equal 1 inch. So 2 stitches equal 1 inch. So make a measurement. A ballpark is just fine. If you stretch this out further this way, the top becomes shorter. If you make it longer, if you make it wider than you need it, then the top is going to be longer. That's just because it stretches both ways really well. So we will be building an inch each row this way, and this first section will determine the sizes. So just as a ballpark, in case you're making it for someone else, for a small to medium, I chained 31. For this one in the picture, because it's a medium to a large, it's actually a large, maybe even an extra large if you were shorter, if you had a shorter trunk. I chained 40 for the one in the picture. Now 1x to 3x, you're not just going to continue to go up in chains. It's going to matter. Just hold a tape measure up here and let it just kind of fall down, and then see what that ends up being, because some of us have a bigger bust or a bigger waist, and we want it to drape over that nicely. So this one, for the plus sizes, is going to be hard to determine. You're going to just need to measure that and see. It doesn't have to be exact. Your gauge isn't going to matter. This is 2 stitches are going to equal 1 inch just about no matter what you do, even if you drop down to a 10mm hook. Even if you drop down to a 10mm hook, it would still be 2 stitches to 1 inch when we're talking about a vertical measurement. Now, the horizontal measurement, that's not going to build an inch at a time. But that won't matter, because you're going to be making this piece right here, this section right here, and then that will determine the amount of rows for all the rest of your sections. So it doesn't matter. I'm not going to say panel because they're not sewn together. It's not done in pieces. It's all one piece. So the 1x to 3x, I can give you a ballpark, but it depends on how tall someone is. If someone's under 5'3" and they're in the plus sizes, then I wouldn't chain more than the 40 plus 1. If they're real tall, if someone's real tall, real long, over 5'6" to 6 foot, I would chain up to 45 to 50. Anyhow, it's not going to matter a ton, but that lets you know what sizes. These will be written down in a pattern for you. You probably won't need them. Let's talk about what this first section. This is going to build an inch at a time, so the rows and inches are going to be the same. If you're making this for someone else, if you're making it for yourself, you can just lay it on your body, and when it covers this half of your body, you know that every other section is going to copy that. But the ballparks for this is a small to a medium is 6 to 8 rows, and a medium to a large is going to be 7 to 9 rows, which is 6 to 8 rows, which is the same as inches. And this will be a 7 to 9 inches or rows, and this will be like you can imagine. This will be an 8 to 10 rows, and the 1x to 3x will be. I have. That's 9 to 12. And don't be afraid to go even 13 rows for this section. So 12 inches, say 12 rows or 12 inches across here is going to be 24 inches here. And it's going to be 48, 50 all the way around, because you've got one or two rows. You've got one row in the armpit to add on, so that's going to be really large. It's going to be above a 3X, but it's going to give a nice flowy, loose feeling without it just being baggy and bulky. So those are your ballparks. Don't be afraid to experiment with it a little bit. You're going to find that it's very forgiving. Then you've got a lot of variances, and it's still going to work because it's super stretchy both horizontally and vertically. Okay, so let's, I'm going to go ahead and make a small to a medium. So I'm going to chain 30 plus 1, so go ahead and decide your amount of chains, and just as a ballpark, if you don't know for sure, go ahead and chain 41, sorry, and follow along with me. I'm going to pause it. Okay, I've chained 31, and they're nice and big, and just for this row only, I will crochet in the back loop. That makes my armpit have 2 loops to work in, and it just makes it a little bit sturdier. You don't have to, but it's really helpful, and it's super easy to see, even for beginners. So beginners, we have, this would be the front loop, this, I'm sorry, the bottom loop. This would be the front loop, the back loop, and then you turn it over, and this is the bottom loop, and this is what I'm going to be crocheting in. This is the only one that we crochet in like this. This is the only time you have to do this, so if you choose not to, don't worry about it. It can be covered up in the sleeves, but this makes it nice, so if you choose not to put sleeves on it, you're all set. So I chain 31, and then I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to double crochet in the 1, 2, 3rd bottom loop from my hook. So pull through 2. Now for stitches, in the tunic, in all the instructions, it'll tell you, if you, like in the tunic, we're doing a single crochet with this big hook, and I tell you to disregard the turning chain. In the cutout shoulder one, we're crocheting in the front loop of much of it, so I give special instructions for that. This is just the basics so you understand, and then special instructions are dealt with in the pattern themselves. So now this will count as 1 stitch. This will count as 2 stitches. So I would like you to double crochet in the bottom loop. Sorry if I say back loop, I mean bottom loop. In the bottom loop of each stitch all the way down to your beginning chain. Pause your video, and I will meet you there. Okay, we'll do the last couple of stitches together. Now, this is actually longer than, because I did 31, this is actually longer than 15 inches, especially once it drapes. But just to give you a ballpark, if yours ends up being too short at the very end, don't worry about it. Just, you can add some more rounds of single crochet or a simple trim and make it longer, and you'll still be able to maintain that shirt tail or scoop bottom. So here we are looking at the bottom loops. Okay, get a good look. So this side, by going in the bottom loops, this will be part of the armpit right here. And that makes the armpit look the same all the way around and gives you 2 loops for the armpit. And that's the only reason I do it. It's not necessary, it's just nice. And with these big stitches, it's really easy to see your front loop, your back loop, and your bottom loop. Okay, so I'm going to double crochet in the bottom loop of the very last 2 stitches, and this is the only awkward part. The rest goes super fast. Now here we are, and you can see here's our beginning chain, and we don't count that as a row. There's our beginning chain, and I'm moving this out of the way, sorry. I'm used to having to keep everything up, but I kicked the dogs out of the room. Okay, so this row is just perfectly normal. There's nothing unusual about it. This is going to be the beginning of our neckline. So this part will always be your top. And that's kind of nice because it's easy to get them wrong and have to pull out a couple of rows. So this is always your top. The initial chain I don't count as a row, so this is row 1. And this is built a little more than an inch because I'm a loose crocheter, which is fine. I like my stuff loose, so it works out. Now, I finished, as you saw, I finished my double crochet. I'm crocheting even looser for you guys than normal. I finished my double crochet, and now normally you would chain 3 and turn. Okay, this is the part that's different. I'm just explaining what the standard is and how this has changed. Normally you would chain 3 and turn. You're going to turn without chaining. Now this is technically the same stitch as your hook, but I'm counting it as the first stitch from your hook. Okay, so a normal pattern is going to say your first stitch from the hook, and they're going to mean this one because this is considered the same stitch as your hook. In my instructions, that's what partially can be confusing if you don't look at the pictures or the videos. We're going to consider this a first stitch from the hook, and this a second stitch from the hook. So there's no chaining, and we're going to turn immediately, and we're going to double crochet in the second stitch from the hook, so this one right here. And it's going to look a little funky, but it'll look perfectly nice when it's done. Sorry, this is really loose. Perfectly nice. Now, so there's no turning chain to count. Okay, we're not counting this as a stitch. Okay, this is ignoring, this is just going to be part of what's going to make it taper down. So we just didn't chain, and then we turned and we went to the second, there was the stitch right after the hook and the second stitch from the hook, and then we're going to double crochet all the rest of the way down in both loops. It's just, the rest of this is very normal, and when we get to the bottom is a little different too, but everything in between is just exactly how you would double crochet in each stitch. Okay, so when counting stitches, see how this starts to taper down and it flattens off, and then when we put a trim on it, it's going to look perfect, guys. It looks a little messy, and that's why you're going to have to count when you come back up. But this is going to count as 1, okay, because there's no turning chain there. This is going to count as, this whole piece is going to be 1 stitch, 2 stitches, 3, 4, 5. That's how we're counting. So everybody get ready to pause, and I want you to do a double crochet in each stitch. It's just all completely normal, and I will meet you down at the bottom at this stitch. So just stop right here before you get to the end. Okay, here we are at the bottom. Now, we're only in row 2. We are not going to maintain a stitch count. This is the chain, row 1, row 2. We're not going to worry about a stitch count, one stitch one way or the other. We're not going to worry about that until we get to row 3. Whatever row 3 is going to be our stitch count. So don't worry, but I'm going to explain to you what some people are possibly getting frustrated with. And what it is I think it's this very first row, and it's down here at the end where people are dropping. Now remember, down here we count this as 1 stitch. We're not worrying about the count right yet. Okay, because there's no turning chain, which we would count as 1 stitch. We're not counting this one. We're moving everything down. So now this is how the stitches work. This is 1 stitch, this is 1 stitch, and then the top of your turning chain is 1 stitch. So what we're going to do is we're going to double crochet, and the count doesn't work in this one, so however this looks to you, don't worry, it's perfectly fine. We're going to double crochet. Now we're at the normal spot. Now you also need to put in standard crocheting, you would put a stitch at the top of your turning chain. So here's our turning chain, and we're going to put a stitch here, but in mine, because we're moving it down, we dropped a stitch here. We decreased here. We're going to increase here by putting 2 double crochets in the top of that turning chain. And that will lay nice and flat. It won't be too bulky. And we're going to put 2 there. Okay, so that part's a little bit different. We put 2 in the top of the turning chain from the previous row. We put 2 stitches in the top of that right there. Okay, I'm letting you look at that so you can see. And the beginning chain is a little funky because it's easy to miss that one. And if you miss that one initially, it's not going to matter because we're not going to maintain a stitch count until our 3rd row. So say that's 39 or 38 or 41, whatever that is, don't worry about it. So here's the other different part. We're going to chain 1, 2, 3, just as you would with a double crochet. You chain 3. We're going to turn it over. And when I say the first stitch from the hook, I mean this one. It's technically the same stitch as your chain 3, and I'm going to put a double crochet in there. And then I'm just going to continue on with a double crochet in each stitch. Hold on, I'll show you what this looks like. Okay, so this might be where now this is going to be our 3rd row, so whatever this ends up being, don't worry about how you did it. Whatever this ends up being, that's the stitch count you're going to maintain. So see how there's 2 stitches in the top of this turning chain, and then technically there's 2 stitches in this stitch also. There's 2 stitches in this. Because this is considered the same stitch in standard crochet. Anyhow, I want you to double crochet in each stitch all the way down until we get to, we'll say, to this stitch. So pause the video and meet me down here. Okay. We're down at the bottom. Well, we're not at the bottom. We're actually back up to the top. Okay, this is going to be the top of our neckline. This is over. Okay, let me put this here. Right here is where we started, and we're tapering down right here. This is where we started, and we're tapering down right here. Okay, so where your beginning chain, where your tail is, that's going to be the top of your garment, your shoulder right here. So that'll keep you from getting the bottom and the top mixed up, although I get the bottom and top mixed up a lot. But I'm pulling out, 1 row usually, and it's 30 or 40 stitches. So it's not a big deal to have to pull that out. See, I'm going to be going 8 rows before I change directions, and you have to increase or decrease by a even number of rows. And the reason for that is because you always need to end up at the bottom to make your armpit, to make your directional change. You just need to end up at the bottom. So that's the reason you want to increase and decrease, add rows by even numbers. So this is always going to be the top where your shoulder is. Okay, so we're at the very last, and as you can see, we're at the very last stitch. And this is where we're going to count. We're at the very last stitch, and this is where we're going to count, and this does count. So we're going to count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28. So we're at 30. And this can be deceptive. This is where we turned without chaining. And so this kind of looks like a little mess here, but it'll look perfectly fine later on. Okay, this was counted as our one stitch. And this is where we turned without chaining. This is where we're at now. Now see, if you were to chain, if there was a chain here and you were to just not crochet in the last chain, it would drop down like a stair step and it wouldn't really scoop at the neck as nicely as I would like. And there's no reason to do it this way. So this is where your count matters. I have 30, which is what I intended. But if you don't have that, don't worry about it. Just crochet in your very last chain, not this right here. Okay, this is the non-turning chain. This is not, doesn't count as a stitch. Okay, I know it looks like one, but remember this counted as one stitch right here. So we're just going to ignore that. And again, because you see the tail means we're at the top, it means we're tapering, we're decreasing the taper. We're going to turn without chaining. Okay, and then again, I've been counting this as a first stitch from the hook, and this is a second stitch. We're going to double crochet in this second stitch right here. And I know this is unconventional for really experienced crocheters. And so that's what can mess people up, is actually the beginners have a little bit of an easier time because they don't, you know, they're not aware of they're not in the habit of doing things in a standard way anyhow. So remember, this only counts as one stitch. We won't be crocheting in this. This counts as one stitch as we count. And we didn't chain when we turned it, and then we're going to double crochet in each stitch all the way down. Now see how this tapers nicely? This will begin to taper, and when we put a trim on it, it'll look really nice. It looks a little funky now, but look, it tapers down perfectly. Now we're going to double crochet just in the standard way all the way down to the bottom. But let's count stitches. And a way to know that you did it right in advance was, remember, mine was a 30, and that's what we're going with. It's however many we counted in row 3. So row 3, remember, we're counting this as 1, 2. Row 3, whatever stitch count you had in row 3 is what you want to maintain. So we can tell, I have 30. We can tell what this is going to be. So we count this as 1. This is not 2. This is 1. This is where we didn't do a turning chain. We're counting this as 1, 2, and then 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26. And then we have 27, 28. And the reason I know that I'm maintaining my stitch count correct is I know in the top of this turning chain, only at the bottom, not at the top, in the top of this turning chain I'm going to put 2. So that's going to have me right at my 30, maintaining my 30 stitch count. So if you have to make adjustments, I'll show you where you can make adjustments, but this is how I know I did it right, because this is where I would be putting 2 double crochets, and that would have me exactly at my 30 stitch count that I had from before. So I'm going to pause the video, and as in the previous row, put in 1 double crochet in each stitch all the way down, and I will meet you down here at this stitch. Okay, here we are at the bottom of the garment. Now, like I said, standard crocheting is going to be different than my instructions, and I do this for a smooth, non-bulky taper. All right, so here is, oops, let it focus. Here's the top. the neckline. Okay, because our string is up here, so we know this is the neckline, this is tapering down. Because we'll be tapering back up for the neckline, that's the reason we just know we're just going to keep track of this part here. So I crochet down to the bottom, and remember, this is, see this loop here? This is good. This means you did it right. Okay, we will be fixing this loop when we single crochet around the neckline. But this loop here means you did it right. This is where you didn't chain and you turned. Okay, so this counts as one stitch right here. So one stitch, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, and this is 27. And then we're going to double crochet in the 28th. Okay, so none of this is confusing, and then we're at the top of this turning chain. And this part is actually standard, except for we're putting 2 stitches in the top of this turning chain. And, you know, because I know that I'm going to be covering this up with a single crochet, I don't really worry about where I go in, but the standard part to crochet in would be right here. It doesn't matter because I know I'm going to be crocheting over it, and so I know it doesn't make a difference, so I just kind of hit it where, you know, wherever I want, kind of. But I'm going to put it right here. See, you're supposed to put it here. I'm going to put it here. It doesn't, trust me, it won't make any difference. I just wouldn't go inside the entire chain. That's going to make it a little bit bulky and not lay very flat. So just pick up 2 wherever. So we're going to put 2 in this one, in the top of the turning chain from the previous row. We're going to put 2 stitches. And that will lay nice and flat. That maintains our stitch count. So we still have 30. This is the bottom of the garment where it will begin to yoke down, be that scoop down like a shirt tail. I have my 30 stitches. It's hard to get it all in screen, but I have my 30 stitches. Now, again, the standard, we're going to chain 3, which would be the standard for a turning chain. If you're doing a half double crochet, you chain 2 to turn. If you're single crocheting, you chain 1. My instructions are always a little bit different to make these shape properly. So we're going to do a double crochet in the very first stitch. These are the chains from the hook and the very first stitch from the hook. It's technically the same one. And so that's probably where the more experienced crocheters, they count, this is the standard first stitch from the hook. And that might be where people are dropping a stitch, the more experienced crocheters. But what I mean is this stitch. So really we're putting 2 double crochets in the same stitch. And then we put another double, we just continue on with another double crochet. So let's look at this again, just so people aren't dropping stitches. There's 2 in the top of the last stitch, and then we put a double crochet in the very first stitch, so it makes it look like there's 2 in this next stitch. And then we double crochet all the way across. Now we're moving back up. This is the bottom of the garment. Here's your tail, so this is the top of the garment. We move all the way back up. Now remember, we're not counting this as a stitch. I mean, this weird turning part where there's this loop. It's supposed to have that. We will double crochet all the way to here, which will maintain your stitch count. For me, that will be 30. So just take a good look at this part. But if you're counting, you will count the turning chain. You'll count the turning chain, and if you're counting, if you're not sure when you get up to here what the stitch is supposed to look like, or if you're where you're supposed to stop, count from here, and when you get to your stitch count, that's when you stop, and it'll be really easy and it won't make this confusing. So I'm going to pause it, and we're going to double crochet all the way to here, maintaining our stitch count, and now we're at 1, 2, 3, 4. This will be our 5th row, which is 5 inches. And let me show you where we're at. This goes really fast. So where we're at is we have done, this one has 8 rows, and so we're at the number 5 of 8 rows here. And if you're doing a small, you're only going to be doing 1 more row after that. So we're almost done with our very first section. So we'll be doing this section, we'll be doing this section. There's no cutting your yarn. We're going to be doing 2 rows at the armpit and continuing on around to the back, which is the same as this. So once we get this part done, we're 1/4 of the way done with the bodice. It's super fast. You don't have to rip out a lot. It's just this change in the middle is a little, can be a little tricky, but once you understand what we're doing, you realize that it's, even for beginners, it actually makes more sense to beginners sometimes because they're not used to doing anything in the standard way possible. Double crochet all the way down till you get to here. Pause the recording and I'll meet you there. Okay, here I am. We're back at the top. You know, it tapers down at the neckline. Here I am back at the top, and this is I counted my stitches. This is stitch 29. I'm doing 30, so I'm going to double crochet in this stitch right here. Remember, ignoring this funky part, and these little loops that stick out are perfectly fine. That's how it's supposed to look. This is where I'm going to, as before, turn it and double crochet when you turn. See, this is 1 stitch from the hook, 2 stitches in the 2nd stitch from the hook. I'm going to double crochet without doing a turning chain. And remember, that's how that looks. This is without doing a turning chain. And then I'm going to double crochet all the way back down to the bottom, and pause it here, and I'll meet you down there. I'm at row 6 at the bottom. Sorry, my camera's moving. We'll let it stop. I'm on row 6 at the bottom. Even numbered rows are going to be at the bottom of the garment. That's helpful when you're changing directions and making the armpits. So just for ease, you're just add on. So for me, I'm going to do 8 rows. I could do 7 and it would fit me just fine, but an even number of rows is easier to work with. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm at the bottom of row 6, and see what we have here. This is our decrease because you don't see a tail. This is our taper decrease, and I hate to say just decrease because we're really, remember the toothpicks, we're just really moving the same stitches, the row down, and then we'll be moving it up. So I'm going to double crochet in the top of each stitch, and then when we get to the turning chain, because this counts as a stitch on the increase, when we get to the turning chain, we're going to put 2 double crochets in the end of the turning chain. So, and then we chain 3, 1, 2, 3, we turn, and we go into the very first stitch, the stitch right here. Now, the standard place would be to go into this stitch. We're not doing the standard, we're going into this stitch. So this counts as 2 stitches. And if you're at a small, if you're small or extra small, you would want to fast forward the video. You would want to fast forward the video to that. You would want to stop at 6 rows and fast forward the next 2 rows. So for those of us that are making a bigger one, larger one, the medium and on up, we're going to continue on and just do a double crochet in each stitch, and I will meet you at, let me show you. Remember this funky part, we don't count any of this. I'll meet you at this stitch right here. So pause the video and I'll meet you there. I'm at the top of the garment, the tapering neckline. Remember, these loops are really nice. Those are good. And I'm on row 7, which is 7 inches, which I'm almost to the middle half of my body. And remember, I'm ignoring this and going to double crochet in the top of this last stitch. I'm going to turn without chaining, and see, this stitch is the one, the first stitch. This is the second stitch. I'm going to double crochet in the second stitch, and I will double crochet in each stitch all the way down in the bottom, and then we're going to talk about how to reverse it. Okay, here we are at the bottom of the garment of the 8th row, and 8 inches is what is the size for me. And so I'm going to double crochet. This is stitch, for me, this is stitch 28. And normally I would put 2 in this last one to make 30 stitches, but we're going to start reversing the tapers so that this tapers down and then starts tapering back up to make that scoop on the bottom. So I'm just going to put 1 in here in the top of this turning chain. So this row is not going to have the right amount of stitches in it yet as we're changing, but don't worry about it. This is where we make all our stitch adjustments, is in this. So we're just putting 1 in there because we're going to begin to taper up. So let's look at this for a general rule of thumb. And because this is very stretchy, it's loose, it goes over a tank top, you could easily just go 6 inches or 6 rows, medium 8 inches or 8 rows, a large 10 inches or 10 rows, and a 1x to 3x, 12 to 14. I mean, you could go 16 rows if you want, just to see how it goes. So basically what I've made here is I have made this section here of the garment, okay, this first half section of the garment, and this is the one that matters, because every other section here, front and back, all the rest of the sections will be exactly the same as this one. They will either be the mirror image or exactly the same, but they will be the same amount of rows. So that's the reason it's called vertical measure as you go, because really you only need a vertical measurement, and then this is set up to fit on your body. And so remember, this is where the top is. Now this is the neckline that scoops down, so we're going to have to begin to scoop up. And as you can guess, so we just put 1 in the bottom here instead of 2. And as you can imagine, this is where we start to do the opposite, but this middle row is a little funky, and this is where you make an adjustment. If you happen to lose a stitch from before, say I only had 29 stitches on this one, then I would go ahead and put 2 in there. This is where you can make your stitch adjustments, but only at the bottom of the garment. They show at the top. So I'm going to chain 1, 2, 3 and turn it over and go in the second stitch from the hook. And so this middle part is going to be somewhat rounded so it doesn't point. So this is where we start to make our change, but it doesn't happen all in one row. That's a little too sharp of a point for me. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make, I just chain 3. So this part is really standard. This whole section here is standard. So I chain 3 and I double crocheted in the second stitch from the hook. And I want you to crochet all the way up and then we'll start to change here. So pause the video and double crochet in each stitch until you get to about here. If you go further than me, just don't worry, you can always pull it out if it's not right. Okay, I just counted my stitches. I'm at the top neckline. We have these nice loops, which is good news. These loops are, every loop is 2 rows, 2, 4, 6, 8. We're at the top, and I'm at stitch 28, and so I need 30. So you will just, this is the only time you will be, well, there's only 2 times and it'll be on the back too. It'll be exactly the same, but you are going to put 2 double crochets in this stitch to make it 30. Okay, and this is kind of really, this makes a cute little keyhole right here. I love how it turns out right in the middle, so you know that this is the middle. And there will always be 12 when you single crochet around the neckline. There's going to be 12 this way and 12 this way. It makes it really easy to count because our neckline, the opening for our heads, doesn't change no matter how large or small we are. It's really pretty similar, but this is where we change. So now we have our 30 stitches because we put 2 in this one. So we're going to begin to increase the taper. So we're gonna go 1, 2, oops, sorry, chain 3. Sorry, I didn't show that very well. We're going to chain 3. We're going to turn, and because we're increasing, we put 2 in this stitch. We're going to double crochet in the very first stitch from the hook. So we're just reversing. That's why it's called a reverse taper. We're just reversing exactly what we did on the other side. And we're gonna continue to double crochet all the way down. Look how nice this is really going to turn out nice. I know it's loose and netty, but the other ones aren't. This will give you the basics for everything you need, and a beginner can do this. It's actually the more experienced. So this is going to wrap around the entire body, and you're going to need a stitch count to match this edge because you're going to be slip stitching to this, to the bottom part of this edge, and leave this open for the armhole. So now I'll show you how this count turns out. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, and then we need 30. So we're going to get down here, and this is going to be 29, and this is going to be 30, and this is the only time we're going to be ignoring this turning chain, and that's just to make the tapering reverse. It makes a nice scooped bottom instead of a pointed bottom, which is nice. So this is the only time we're going to be doing this, except for on the back. We're going to be doing the same thing because the back and front of this garment are the same. And it's reversible, but you'll see that it doesn't matter. So we're going to double crochet in each stitch all the way down to this stitch right here. We're going to ignore this on this row only until we get to the same row in the back. I'll meet you there. Okay, so I said at the bottom is where you want to do stitch count corrections. This taper, reversing your taper increase decrease is a good place for that. But you want to make sure the top is uniform. You make them at the bottom. So you can see here's your center. Here's where you made the change. So there always needs to be like 2 stitches up here. After this, you need to see it needs to increase by 2. So say you got down here, now I'm working with 30 stitches, however many you're working with. Say you got down here and you only had, you got down, you're going to put a stitch in this one, but say you got down here and you only had 29 stitches and you needed 30, then go ahead and put one in here as long as you had 2 stitches in the top here. Go ahead and put one in there, otherwise ignore it. If you have too many stitches, I wouldn't suggest, you could fix that in the armpit. I wouldn't suggest doing a tog decrease, which would be combining 2 stitches, and you would go like this and combine it with this one. I wouldn't suggest doing that because I've found that it makes it too bulky. So I would suggest just correcting it at the bottom as you go. That's usually not the problem. People are usually dropping stitches, not increasing it, so it's usually not even a thing. Okay, so we're down here and I'm at 30 stitches. This is the only time, oh, I'm sorry, I'm at 30 stitches. This is the one and only time. Let me double check. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 28, 30. I'm at 30 stitches. And it's during this the taper increase, decrease, reverse that I'm ignoring this turning chain. I'm down here, but now we have to decrease, we have to taper decrease at the bottom. So as you guessed, probably, we're going to turn it without chaining, and we're going to double crochet in the second stitch from the hook. First one, second one, just like we did on the top before. Oops, and that one's going to be a little tricky. And then we're going to double crochet back to the top of the garment. So this is the bottom of the garment, and see how it's nicely starting to scoop? It's the bottom of the garment, and this is the top of the garment. And so we're going to do the exact same amount of rows, but we've got to end at the bottom. So this is going to become a mirror image. So crochet all the way to the top. Remember this, oh, let's go over this again. Remember where we did this, this counts as 1 stitch right here. And we're going to crochet all the way to the top, and when we get to the top, in this turning chain, whoops, in this turning chain, we're going to put 2 double crochets. So we're just reversing exactly what we did before. And so that's going to be 2 double crochets. That's going to maintain your stitch count, and it's going, the neckline's going to begin to increase up to the shoulder. I will meet you at this stitch. Here we are at the top of the neckline. Here's your tail, and I keep track. Trust me, I have mixed up my increase and decrease before because I just get crocheting, watching TV or whatever. But this is only 30 stitches to count for me, and at the most it's going to be 40-45 stitches to count, and it's not a big deal to just go back and count. If you have to count every time, don't worry about it. Just remember when you count that this decrease, weird decrease part counts as 1 stitch right here. Okay, so we're going to double crochet into the last stitch, which is stitch number 28, and then we're at the turning turning chain, the and we're going to put 2 double crochet in the top of the turning chain. These hooks are big, but this is really a great thing for beginners, so stick with it. But once you get the concept down, those of you that are really advanced can shape things however you want. I mean, it'll just make a nice addition to how you shape things. Okay, so we're beginning to increase here. And then as, see, we put 2 in the top of the turning chain. We chain 1, 2, 3. We turn it, and then we're going to double crochet in this very first stitch right here. Okay, so here's the very first stitch. It's actually technically the same stitch as your chain 3. So just so you know what the standard is, and you know that this isn't standard. So we have 2 in there. See, we have 2 in this one, and technically 2 in there, even though it looks like a separate stitch. And we double crochet in each stitch all the way down to the bottom. Okay, and then, oh, bumped it again. Then when we get down to the bottom, remember we're decreasing at the bottom now. We're starting to decrease. So when we get to the bottom, we count to 30 stitches, which is to here, and then we turn without chaining. So we're already more than 1/4 of the way done with the bodice. I'm not sure what happened there. Well, okay, I'm going to make this section 1, and I will pick this back up on the next row.